Welcome to Conejo Valley Visionaries, a weekly podcast spotlighting the people and stories behind your favorite Conejo Valley businesses. I'm your host, Christina Denstead. Today, we're joined by Dr. Gerhard Apfelthaler, the Dean of the School of Management at Cal Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, California. Gerhard is an accomplished business professor and a dynamic leader who has transformed the landscape of business education in the Conejo Valley and beyond. From founding successful community initiatives like Hub 101 to launching the Dorfman Incubator Grants, Gerhard has been at the forefront of creating opportunities for entrepreneurs to thrive. In this episode, we'll explore Gerhard's career journey from diplomat to academia and how entrepreneurship has remained a common thread. Before we dive into this conversation, I want to remind you, if you love supporting local businesses, please share this episode with a friend. Spreading the word is a powerful way to help our community thrive. With that, here's Dr. Gerhard Apfelthaler. In last week's episode, Tyler Cusick, the owner and CEO of Westlake Yoga Co., shared how much yoga impacted his life, both personally and professionally. And I can relate. I got into yoga when I was living in Brooklyn in the early 2010s, and it too not only changed my physical well-being, but also my mental health. If you've been thinking about giving yoga a try, now's your chance. Tyler is generously offering 10% off a drop-in class when you use code PODCAST at checkout. So visit westlakeyogaco.com and use code PODCAST when you book a drop-in class. Maybe you give hot yoga a try or a non-heated class, also a meditation or a Pilates class. There's so many amazing options at Westlake Yoga Co. And all of the teachers have hundreds of hours of training, which really makes it a easy transition if you're trying yoga out for the first time. So use code PODCAST at westlakeyogaco.com when you book a drop-in class and receive 10% off. Hi, Dr. Apfelthaler. Thank you so much for being on Conejo Valley Visionaries with me.
Hey, good morning. It's a pleasure.
Great. Well, I am thrilled to have you. As you know, the listeners know, the podcast is usually focused on the founders or CEOs behind local startups, which I know you are one of. However, I'm excited to speak to you today as the Dean of the School of Management at Cal Lutheran and an international business professor, and really just understand all that you're doing for the startup community in the Conejo Valley. So thank you so much for being here.
Sounds lovely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. Okay, so what we like to do here at Conejo Valley Visionaries is start from the beginning. So what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, God, that was a long time ago. So, thinking back, it's not that if you are like a 5 or 6 year old, you have great visions of what your future is going to look like, right? But I kind of expected the question. So I pulled a photo from the wall behind me.
Yes.
And that pretty much tells the story. I don't know if you can see this, but this is
So cute.
this is probably 3 or 4 year old me. So I wanted to be a train conductor, right?
Okay,
And
yes.
I don't
In
know
the
what it
photo, you're
was.
wearing a train conductor hat. People who are watching on YouTube can see it, but yes, you're 3 or 4 with a cute train conductor outfit on. Is that right?
Right, exactly. And I don't know whether that was my need for authority. I have no idea, but that's what I thought, right? So you get a government issued bag and you get the cap and you can throw people off the train if they don't have a ticket. I don't know. But of course, life takes twists and turns. And as you grow older, you develop a better vision of what's even possible.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small village in Austria, just about an hour south of Vienna, the capital. It was really a small village of about 800 population. But it was not just a different country and, a very different environment from a city like LA. But it was also different times, of course, right? So things worked differently at that time.
So, okay, early visions of a train conductor. You even had the outfit picked out. What happened next? What did you decide to then study in school?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, right, if you grow up in a village of 800 or so, there are not many opportunities. So the first step that you take is you go to high school in the next bigger city, which in my case was at the time probably a city of about 20,000 or so. Okay. So your horizon becomes a little broader, right? Your outlook to the world becomes a little broader and more ambitious. And So I went to high school. I went to a type of high school that focused on trade, commerce, and business. So was practically educated to be an accountant or an insurance agent or working in a bank as a bank teller, right? Um, but so I was one of really just a few. I think we were like two or three of my high school graduating class that went on to college. So there was then the next step. Went to college in Vienna, and that's where actually I think the groundwork was laid for my later career due to the pick of majors that I had.
Yeah. So, what did you decide to study then?
So, in my last year or last couple of years of high school, I had a vision of becoming an artist. I was always, I was the quiet child. I was more of an introvert. So I spent a lot of time at home drawing and painting. And I think I had developed some skills. And I pursued that during high school quite a bit. And so I thought I would become a painter. Again, different times, right? So my parents had a different idea of what my future should look like. And at that time, you went to business school, or you went to law school, or you went to med school, or you became an engineer. These were the
The only
options.
tracks available.
Yeah, these
Okay.
were the options. So I gave up the plan of becoming a painter pretty quickly. Uh, and since my father was an accountant, I decided to enroll in business school. Uh, but at the same time, maybe that was my act of rebellion. I tried to find another program, do a double major that had a different environment. It was different in terms of content and degree, and but also size. I went to what is still, I think, the largest business school in Europe, with an enrollment of about 25,000 students just in the business school.
Whoa.
Um, and so I was looking for a really small major. And I think the choices, if I remember correctly, were Egyptian studies, archaeology, and Chinese studies. And so I really had no idea, but I was kind of fascinated with East Asian cultures also.
Hmm.
Maybe that's also because of painting. I was interested in art and East Asian art. And at the very same time, the Chinese government, for the first time in its history, showed that famous terracotta warrior army that was at the gravesite of the first
Sure.
emperor of
Yes.
China in a museum abroad. And the museum happened to be in Vienna. So I got to speak to one of the docents there who was actually a grad student in the Department of Chinese Studies, and that sealed the deal for me. So I took up a second major in Chinese studies.
So, question, did business manage or business school back then mean accounting? Was that kind of what you were expected to do with a business major?
No, it was actually much broader, right? So it
Okay.
had the whole gamut from accounting to marketing to strategy, operations, and yeah, everything. Just entrepreneurship wasn't on the radar yet at that
Sure.
time.
Right. Okay. So you went, studied business as well as this focus on Chinese studies. What did you anticipate you would do when you graduated?
Yeah, well, I guess my idea was with 25,000 students in a business school, you got to have an edge, right, over others. And so I thought that focus on China, the Chinese language skills, that would actually give me an edge. And this was at a time when China started to open up economically to the world. And so I thought there would be some opportunities for me engaging in trade with China, setting up business in China, and so forth. Of course, it never worked out that way.
Well, it's very forward thinking of you, especially as a college student. So it's very impressive. But yes, as you sort of alluded to, where did you end up journeying? What was your next move?
Yeah, so the disappointment was that I did interview after I graduated from university. I did interview with a number of companies that had business in China. And the disappointing thing was they were probably looking for translators and interpreters, but not for somebody that had the dual skill set of, on the one hand, having a business degree, and on the other hand, having Chinese language skills and knowledge of Chinese culture. So there wasn't really something in the market for me. And so I decided to actually stay at the university. I got a job offer there. And so I worked at the very same business school that I graduated from for a number of years. And it was another interesting decision because it opened up my view of the world, really, as I was working in the international relations department at that time.
That's so exciting and also hard to believe. I mean, talk about short-sighted that these businesses were not, seeing that somebody who had the very specific business studies and international knowledge could add value to their companies. But
Yeah, I'm still puzzled by that in a way.
yeah, right. That's very interesting. So you stayed at the university, and then how did you decide to? Did you decide at that moment you wanted to stay in higher education, or did you want to see more of the world before that?
No, not at all. I had one goal, which was leave Austria.
Okay.
You know, nothing against my country. I have a deep love for my culture and my history and my traditions, but it's a small country, right? So the total population of Austria is about the population of Los Angeles. Uh, you can literally cross the country in probably 5 hours from west to east.
Hmm.
You drive 2 hours and you're in a completely new country with a new language. So you grow up with a sense of that there is a wider world out there. And yeah, and I wanted to explore that wider world.
So
So that
how
was
did you
pretty
do
cool.
that? What did
Yeah.
you decide to do?
Well, the first step was actually during my college years, where if you really want to perfect your Chinese language skills, then you have to study abroad, right? So I spent about 10 months in Taiwan at that time, which was a great experience that shaped me personally, right? Not just in terms of skills development, but was also at a time when the world wasn't quite as open as it is today and people didn't travel that much. And
Mhm.
so sometimes I walked the city for days and I was the only foreigner on the streets, right? Visibly foreign.
Yeah.
So that shaped my perception of what it's like to be a minority. But it also helped me develop a love for being the foreigner, being the stranger, being the explorer for life. And that's what I wanted to do. So when I worked at the business school, then I had an opportunity to pursue that to some extent as I was managing a network of partner institutions globally. So I
Mhm.
got to travel to different universities worldwide. But I also understood that it's not a career for life. And so I entered Austria's diplomatic service, which is an interesting animal. It's basically split into the traditional diplomacy that is managed by the State Department. And then there is the whole commercial section, which is similar to the US Foreign Commercial Service. And that's managed in Austria by the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber. They maintain about 100 offices worldwide, which are there to help Austrian companies doing business abroad. And so I entered that organization, and that actually got me my first posting abroad that brought me to the United States for the first time around in the 90s.
Have you been wanting to try out the viral lash lift trend? Or maybe ditching the brow gel and going for a brow lamination? Well, this is your sign to give it a try before the holiday season. As a special offer for our listeners, Brittany Carpenter, the owner of Face and Soul Studios in Thousand Oaks, is offering 10% off any of her brow and lash services when you use code PODCAST at checkout. Book your appointment at faceandsoulstudios.com and try out a lash lift, a brow lamination, or maybe even a lash tint. It's time to invest a little bit in your self-care before the holiday season. Enjoy. What a interesting path, and I think a very smart use of obviously your skill sets and your desire to go abroad. Now, one would think since you were studying Chinese, you were in those studies that you maybe would be posted in China for something like that. But it sounds like you got taken to the US. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, again, that was my hope, right? That they would have the good sense of sending me into the Chinese speaking environment. But initially, at the junior stage, you don't get to pick where you go, right? You're being assigned your destination. And so initially, my destination was supposed to be Munich. And I was really deeply disappointed because same language, very similar culture to Austria, just about, I want to say, 3 to 4 hours away from Vienna. So that wasn't really the exotic destination I had hoped for. But then, just a short while before my deployment, um, it was my head office made the decision to extend the contract of my predecessor in Munich for the Munich location, and all of a sudden a place in the US opened up, and so within a month, right? So we I prepared to be in a completely different environment. Wasn't too excited actually either about LA. I
And
had
did you
never,
speak English?
yeah, I mean, you learn English from, well, at my time, I think we started in fourth grade,
Okay.
and of course through my exposure in my college years, you pick up English beyond the classroom instruction. Yeah, so I wasn't too excited either. I had never been to the US before, but it probably turned out to be the best thing that happened to me in my professional career.
And that's when you first were brought out to Los Angeles, to
Yeah.
California.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that was in the 90s. It was actually in the year of the Northridge earthquake. Um,
That's a shocking time to be here.
exactly, right? So I came about 6 months later.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it was an interesting time in LA.
Yeah, when all the I'm assuming at that point rebuilding or hopefully just trying to sort through it all too. Taking a step back, how would you suggest somebody, maybe younger now to foster this sense of globalization or this international desire that you had, this worldliness? Because I wonder if that's, I mean, it sounds like that was innate to you, but even growing up in a small town to then want to be exposed to more, you can tell you're very passionate about it. But is there
Yeah.
something that you would express for people to think about doing now?
Yeah, when you grow up in a small village, there are probably some people who really appreciate that environment. That you're out on the street, you know everybody. Parents let their children loose basically because the only people that are out there are your neighbors,
Yeah.
right? So it was a pretty protected childhood, and I enjoyed it also. But at the same time, well, some people aren't cut out for that, right? And so because there is, after a while, you know everything, you know everybody, and it gets a little bit boring, right?
Mhm.
If you grow up in a city like LA or New York, right, you have diversity around you in all different areas all the time, so you probably feel less of a need to explore
Yeah.
because there are so many opportunities locally. But
Got
if
it.
you don't have those opportunities, then, well, I would probably 9 out of 10 people love it and stay, and then 1 out of 10 just wants to leave, and that was me.
Seek something more. And it's interesting how something like this art exhibition, when you were younger, kind of opened your eyes to more. It's funny how those core memories can end up defining so much of your future.
Yeah, and I think that's it, Christina. Right? You asked about my recommendation for young people, right? So I would say expose yourself to as many different experiences as you can, right? Even if you don't like museums, go to museums. If you don't like the arts or the theater or music, still expose yourself to different areas and ideas. You never know when inspiration is going to hit you.
Yeah. So you find yourself out in Los Angeles and 1990. About what age are you then?
I think it was about 26 or so.
Okay.
So mid to late 20s was the time of my life, right? So I was married at that time, but we didn't have children yet, and so we lived a diplomatic high life. I mean, make no mistake, I also worked, right? It was exciting work. It was good work. I enjoyed it a lot, but at the same time, right? So the government pays for your car and your apartment and well, and then of course California, right? The sun shines 350 days a year. Very different from my home environment.
Of course, I'm sure. And what did the role entail? What were you working on?
So basically, these offices that the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber maintains, they are there to help Austrian companies doing business in other countries. So I would say over a normal year, and I was here for about 3 years in that role, um, you consult to about 300, 400 different companies, everything from the small mom and pop shop that wants to export their, I don't know, their cakes to the United States to really large companies that are defense contractors or that set up manufacturing plants in the United States. So it was a great learning experience. It's the dirty little secret, right? On the one hand, you're supposed to help. On the other hand, with each project that you do, with each client, you learn more. So it was a wonderful learning experience.
I can imagine. And to think back, this is obviously pre-Amazon, pre-social media, to think about even bringing in a mom and pop Austrian business to the US is kind of hard to believe. I mean, pre-globalization in a lot of ways. So, yeah, you must have been learning a lot, exposing a lot. Do you have an example of a company that you were able to either bring here or maybe not?
Let's focus on the maybe not. So
Okay.
my claim to fame is so everybody knows Red Bull, right? Of course. And but not many people know that it's actually an Austrian company.
Mm.
One of the biggest success stories in the sort of branded food and beverage market in Austria. And so one day when I was here at the LA office, um, a gentleman of Dutch origin who worked for Red Bull walked into our office, and we had no idea who Red Bull was at that time. It was a brand new product, but they started to look into other markets. And yeah, he approaches it. Hey, we have this thing here, energy drink in cans. We're trying to develop the US market. Can you help? And so, as you mentioned, right, this was pre-internet, or it was the early days of the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of reliable information out there. So what you do in that role is you spend a lot of time on the phone, going out, talking to people to acquire all the information and the knowledge that you can or back then couldn't get in any other way. So I talked to a number of beverage distributors, and every single one said, forget about it. This is never going to work. In the US, we eat energy, we don't drink energy. It was the time when the power bars and the protein bars started to come to market. So, we went back to Red Bull and we said, hey, we don't think it's going to work. There's no market. Consumer demands are different. Plus, you have to go through FDA because of the ingredients you have in your Red Bull drink. So forget about it. Well, I guess the rest is history, right? Today, the US is the
A little
largest.
known brand.
So
So
sometimes you fail, right?
exactly, yes, but that didn't stop you. You kept going. What did you do? So you were in the LA market for 3 years. Did you decide to then move to the Conejo Valley, or what was your next step
Oh
after that?
no, no. So a few more twists and turns in my
Okay.
career. So the first one was after about 3 years in a junior position with that organization. You're either transferred to another country or you're called back to Austria, either to headquarters, or you're actually being placed with an Austrian company so that you can help their export efforts from inside. And so I was assigned to a pretty large company, actually, in the railway business, to the legal department. I don't have a law degree. So, again, bit of a disappointment, right? How did that work? What am I going to do there? How can I create value for these people? So I wasn't too excited, but we were ready to leave. So we actually got prepared for moving back to Vienna. And then one day the phone rings. A friend of mine from Austria calls, who was a university professor, and he was involved with the developing the concept for a brand new university. And he
Mm.
calls me and he says, "Hey, we actually got approval for to start a brand new university in Austria that was supposed to be government funded but privately managed." And he said, "We need to start quickly." And we are building a team. It's really hard to find people who are available on short notice. Would you be interested? So didn't take long, and within a week or two, I had signed a contract, and I
Mhm.
moved back to Austria. I was literally employee number two at a brand new university. And yeah, so I did that for a number of years, which was one of the most entrepreneurial things I've ever done, probably.
I can imagine, and especially coming from a government job where you have, the ability to like some structure, and then you're going into something where you're starting from the ground up. Interesting, like jump career wise, but also sounds like that really kind of like excited you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I always had it in me.
Mm.
Of course, I'm also a little bit risk averse. That's my Austrian conservative upbringing. So the good news was we didn't have to raise funds, right? We had government funds to play with. But still, when I arrived in that little town in the west of Austria, a town of about 12,000 population at the time, um, there was nothing there really that we could build on, right? So we had a small team. I think by the time I arrived, there was a third employee, but that was pretty much it. So we had to build a team of administrators, staff, and professors. We had to recruit students. We had to find facilities. We bought a building, converted the building, and we actually got started within a month of my arrival in Austria, which was just crazy.
Yeah, that is a wild timeline. And to think about making those decisions, how do you decide to market to new students? You're building a whole new university. What were some of the kind of first things that you had to do to get professors to sign on, to convince students to give you guys a chance? Do you remember
Yeah.
any kind of thing that you had to sort of um, levers you could pull back then?
Um, it was tough, of course, right? And I've never done that before, so we didn't really have a point of reference. Neither one of us had that, and maybe that was an advantage, right? Because we weren't trapped in a certain mindset of how to go about it. So I think we're pretty much salespeople, right? Trying to sell a place, a university that nobody had ever heard of, that's still in the making, to potential faculty members, potential students. Um, and yeah, and of course, I think you attract a certain type of person also. You don't attract a career academic that wants to see that, I'm here on a trajectory that leads to success, because everything was up in the air, really. These were people who wanted to be part of something new. Same thing on the student side, right? Maybe we attracted more students that were local and were looking for a local alternative at that time, which changed rapidly in the years after. But yeah, I think it was mostly focusing on the local, finding the adventurous people, and the rest was a sales job, really, right? So uh, inspiring them about future possibilities, because you couldn't excite them about what was there because there was nothing there, right? You
Of
All we
course.
talked about was the future.
So was the word entrepreneur around at that point? Because it's so common now, but there was a time in the not too recent past where people weren't talking about
Yeah.
entrepreneurism, or were, maybe calling your role that at that time.
Yeah, definitely not in Austria,
Okay.
right? Again, Austria is a conservative culture, very traditional. That has changed over the last 10 years tremendously. Austria has one of the most vibrant startup ecosystems in Europe right now. But back then, no, it wasn't even a word, I think, right? People had no concept.
So with that, did you decide, because it is kind of, I feel like, two parts, if you're looking back at your career, there's the entrepreneur component, but also the higher education. So you're in this role, do you realize I want to do this forever?
Um, I think it started, but there was one more step. I think, often we might think that entrepreneurship and higher education, those are opposites. Those are two different mindsets and systems and histories that don't go together. But the fact is that, entrepreneurs need education, educated workforce, need to have a vested interest in getting the talent that they need. On the other hand, higher education is also something that, especially now, is constantly changing and needs to innovate, right? Especially now with the new technologies, with AI coming up. That there is, I think that the Venn diagram, right, the circles are starting to move closer to each other. Um, but no, I didn't think of a career in higher education back then. In fact, after 3 years at that university, I was on an extended leave of absence from my government job. And so my head office called and said, "Hey, you got to make a decision. Either you leave for good or you come back." And so I answered with a question, which was, "Well, what would you have to offer if I came back?" And they offered me a position in Singapore. So, well, that was exciting enough, right? An exotic destination, finally, a Chinese speaking environment after so many years of not having been able to do exactly that. So, once again, we packed up and we left for Singapore.
And how did you find it? Did it meet all of your expectations?
Singapore did,
Okay.
absolutely, right? Exciting environment. It's not just Chinese and Chinese speaking, but it's also very multicultural. Singapore has a sizable Indonesian, Malaysian, Indian, and even a Western minority. Very vibrant place. They really make things happen. So that was exciting. what I had forgotten was for 3 years, I was building a university. We were throwing around money. We were experimental in our approach. And then you go back to your government job, and yeah, well, there are processes and procedures and forms and micro politics to be played, right? So there was a certain sense of disillusionment that set in pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be a hard transition back into that, especially when you were able to build something on your own without all those policies in place. So, how long did you last in Singapore?
A little longer than a year.
Okay.
And it was that short because about 10 months into my stay in Singapore, phone rings again, right? And somebody else from Austria calls. Again, it was a relatively young university, not a startup, but about 10 years in the making at the time. That was a technical university focused on engineering, and they wanted to build business programs. So they reached out to me. They had known me from before, what I did in Austria before in higher education. And so I was offered a job. And once again, this time a little faster, we packed our suitcases, moved back to Austria. And yeah, and we built the business programs at that university.
That is, I mean, your ability to be so nimble is, I think not everybody probably has that in them, which is really smart because then you're going to do all the different things that you want to try and do and be open to them. And
Yeah.
obviously, you had made a name for yourself, it seems like in that space and both sides of it. So being able to get those kind of calls. Is really incredible. How long were you at that university, or how did you make your way at some point to the Conejo Valley?
Yeah, interesting question. At that point in time, I also have to say, right, the older you get, and also once you have children, things get a little harder, right? It's not as easy as packing up and jumping on a plane and starting your new life
Yeah.
anymore. So at that university, the second university in Austria, I stayed for 8 years. And after 8 years came the move to California. And how that came about was at the first university that we built. One of our programs had two mandatory study abroad requirements. So there was not an option for students. They had to go, they had to study abroad for 2 semesters. And so we had a real need to develop partnerships with universities globally very, very quickly. So in addition to building a university, I was kind of the traveling salesman also for 3 years. And one day, I meet a professor from Cal Lutheran at a conference in Switzerland. And we started to talk. We actually became close personal friends over many years. And so we developed an exchange partnership. So we sent students to Cal Lutheran, they sent students to us. We started to exchange professors. Over time, I did come out to Cal Lutheran more frequently. I taught weekend classes in the MBA program. And that relationship survived all my career changes. It changed a little bit with every career move, but it survived. And at one point, I think in 2008, I was offered a full-time position at Cal Lutheran. And so with my family, we decided that we probably have one more move in us. And so once again, packing the suitcases, loading your belongings into a container, and off you go.
It's kind of full circle moment. So the beginning and, kind of closing out maybe, although I have a feeling you have, even more in you, but so you make your way to Cal Lutheran and did you start as a dean or, how did
No, it was also that I was really working a lot while I was in Austria. So the idea of being in a more stable environment, and focusing on one thing and one thing only, being a professor, that had an appeal at that time. So I came here to be a professor. I also oversaw the graduate programs, but I was very much looking forward to more of a traditional academic life. Um, but maybe I had miscalculated or not known myself enough.
that?
So when my predecessor, the previous dean of the School of Management, decided to retire, I threw my hat in the ring. They made me jump through all the hoops. I don't know how many interviews I had over 2 days of campus visits, and yeah, they picked the person with the accent, to my surprise.
And what year was that?
That was 2013.
2013. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, as the dean, what are your responsibilities include?
No day looks like another.
Okay.
Sometimes when I'm at networking events, where people introduce themselves, I jokingly say I'm the head of the complaints department at Cal Lutheran. So a lot of what you do is you remove the roadblocks for your students and your faculty so that students can learn what they're supposed to learn and so that faculty members can teach what they're supposed to teach and research what they're supposed to research, right? So you, as a dean, you create the environment for all of that. And that means everything from very minor tasks of, getting the curriculum right and making sure that you evaluate the performance of your staff and your faculty members to the larger questions of where do we go, right? What's the future of a business school at a mid-sized regional university?
Was there an entrepreneurship program when you first started as dean?
There was a program that was called Entrepreneurship, but
Okay.
I wouldn't, by today's standards, it was more like a small business program and was only focused on coursework, basically. But we always say, chemistry students need a lab, exercise students need their own facilities. Uh, Entrepreneurship students also need their lab. And
Hmm.
so very early on in 2013, we started to strategize of how could we provide an experiential learning component that benefits our students, but also benefits our community around us. Community involvement is very important to me. And so we totally revamped our programs in entrepreneurship, and we also developed quite a portfolio for our students and for the community in events and activities and even a space.
Yeah. So, tell me about the space. Hub 101. Is that right?
That is correct. So,
Okay.
Hub 101 is part of our Dorfman Center for Innovation Entrepreneurship, which is part of the School of Management. So, in 2013, just in the month before I became the dean officially, I reached out to a number of people in the startup ecosystem trying to figure out what should we do as a university with entrepreneurship. And so I talked to a number of people individually, bilaterally, and at one point I realized this is not going to get me anywhere. So why don't we all get together? We'll spend a day and we'll hammer out the vision for entrepreneurship in the Conejo Valley. So the interesting thing was the week before the meeting, my phone kept ringing, and people who had never met before called me and said, "Hey, I heard you're putting this group together. Can I come? Can I join? Can I contribute?" And
Wow.
so my response always is, "The more, the merrier. Join us." And so we ended up with a room full of about 100 people. Um, Entrepreneurs, investors, IP attorneys, activists, people from
All local Conejo Valley folks.
all local Conejo Valley. And so we developed basically a vision for what the ecosystem could look like. And the interesting thing was one of the late stage visions was 10 years out, we want to have a space where we can congregate as a community. Because everybody said there is a lot going on, but we're not connected. And one of the reasons we're not connected is there is no connector and there's no space where we can meet. And so it was a fortunate moment because at the very same time, our enrollment at Cal Lutheran was at an all time high. The campus was bursting at the seams, and we needed a new classroom facility. So when I was approached by the president at that time to help look for a facility off campus where could teach graduate courses mostly, well, my response was, well, can you imagine that we extend the concept of a classroom facility to something larger? And so what started out as a 10-year vision for that group, we actually then realized within a year, we found a space in Westlake Village. Well, frankly, we didn't have much of an idea what it should be like. But we started a space that is a co-work space, that is a community space, that has offices, that has quiet work zones, that has an event space, and that is Hub 101.
I mean, your timelines, you are good at expediting what would normally be a longer term project and making it happen. And that's amazing. And so that's open to not only students, but also the community at large.
Absolutely, right. So the intention was to do something that benefits our students, but also something um, that makes us as a university, as a regional university, live up to our responsibility towards the larger community. Or in other terms, right, you could say we do well if the economy around us does well.
Mhm.
And so in recent years, right, we've seen that large companies have left Ventura County and the Central Coast. Um, so we wanted to do something to help young companies and founders start and grow. So it was not just an altruistic motive, it was also very selfish in a way that we need a vibrant economy. We need companies that our students can do internships in, that where they can get jobs, right? So there's a lot of benefit. It's a symbiotic relationship, really.
And then when did the your incubator grant come along? So these are all parts of the entrepreneur program within the School of Management. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So there's a bit of a long story behind that, but the short version of the story is we have a major benefactor at the School of Management, Mr. Steve Dorfman, who is the former vice chairman of Hughes Electronics, and he was the CEO of Hughes Space and Communications, the guys who sent the first satellites up into space. He contributed a large sum of money towards the School of Management for various entrepreneurial initiatives and activities. And one of them are non dilutive grants for startups, the Dorfman Incubator Grants. So every year, we award around 150 to about $180,000 to three, four, five companies
Hmm.
um, that don't necessarily have to have a relationship with Cal Lutheran, right? You don't have to be a student or an alum. You just have to document that in some ways you're using the money not only to build your company, but also to benefit our students by means of experiential learning, internships, projects, case studies, and so forth.
That's so incredible. When did the grant first become available? When did you launch it?
So we just are in the process of awarding the third round of
Okay.
incubator grants. So we have a few in the pipeline, and I think we'll be soon reporting some good news over the first cohorts.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you have any examples of success stories or businesses that you're really excited to see how they what they grow into?
Yeah, there's a couple of companies that I'm excited about for very different reasons. Of course, right, as you know, in the world of early stage companies, the metric usually is out of 100 companies, 10 survive, one really makes it big. So that's not a huge success rate. Um, and I think we'll probably have a better success rate even with the incubator grants. From the first cohort of grant recipients, for instance, we have a company called InvoCure that is building a platform for medical supplies. Think of it as the Amazon.com, but just focused on medical supplies. Surprisingly, there's nothing out there that is similar. The market is very fragmented, right? Every doctor's office, every small clinic organizes their own purchasing, and with that platform, he's making it easier and also more economical for all of those providers, healthcare providers, to source their products. And he's on a really good trajectory, so that's going to be a commercial success. Um, Another one that's a little early, still in development, is a company called Horditech, which was actually founded by one of our alumnus.
Hmm.
She graduated last year, and she's a good example for how you can inspire students to entrepreneurship. Um, the alumnus name is Andrea Brimmer. She always had it in her as well, but I think we brought it out a little more in her. So Andrea was one of our most active students on campus. She founded a club, the Women in Business Club, that is still very, very active. And at one point, she participated in our new venture competition, and where we award cash prizes. But also, one of the prizes is we send students to a 3-week startup boot camp in Europe. It's
That's
called the
incredible.
European Innovation Academy, which takes place in Porto, Portugal. And it's a gathering place from students from all over the world that pitch ideas, join forces, and over 3 weeks develop startup companies. And Andrea developed a concept for how to use basically animal waste into fertilizer. And so she developed that concept there, found a few engineers from various other universities across the US. Um, and so she came back to her senior year at Cal Lutheran. And about a month or so after she comes back, she tells me she negotiated a licensing agreement with NASA. She was still a student at that time. Um, Amazing, right?
Wow.
I mean,
Yes.
where do you even start, right? Who do you call at NASA
I
if
have
you
no
first?
idea, right? And you're so early on, but the confidence and the knowing that is pretty amazing.
Yeah. So NASA apparently had a technology that was of interest to her company, and so she got the license. She's building her startup. She's still hard at it, and she
Wow.
just got a grant from us for that.
My
Yeah.
goodness. Well, I cannot watch and wait to see how all of the businesses continue to grow. But it sounds like the university, yourself, the School of Business Management really is a nurturing space. I mean, what programs that you are able to offer and how you're able to, like you said, bring it out of people. What would you say to somebody who's thinking about, who's currently looking at universities? Why would Cal Lutheran maybe be a good spot for them,
Yeah.
especially if they're
You know,
interested in business.
I think you said the right word, right? Nurturing. Look for a nurturing environment.
Mm,
Um, I mean, we're not Harvard, we're not Stanford, we're not Wharton, and these are all great schools, right? But in essence, a marketing course is a marketing course is a marketing course, an accounting course is an accounting course, wherever you go. So look for the whatever the university offers you outside of the classroom. It
okay.
starts with our small classes where our classes are taught by professors and not teaching assistants. If you have a problem, you talk to your professor. If you don't show up to class, your professor might give you a call and say, "Hey,
Mhm.
what's up? Is there anything I can help you with? Right? Are you struggling?" Um, what kinds of event portfolio do you have, right? What kinds of networks does the university have and offer you access to as a student? And well, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, do you have a space like Hub 101 where students can meet entrepreneurs and get involved, right? So it's the little experiential learning, the nurturing that really
Okay.
matters.
That sounds pretty intimate. And I know one of the things with the grants too, right? It's not just the money, it's also the relationships that you offer, the mentorship that come with that.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So money is one thing, space is another thing that's fungible, right? You can get that anywhere. But the access to the networks, the expertise that we have, the programming that we offer, I think that makes all the difference.
Are you happy that you landed in the Conejo Valley after all of your global travels?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I love my environment here. I love my job. I love my life. Sometimes I miss the walkable cities
Hmm.
from Europe, right? Sometimes I miss the fact that, yeah, on the weekend, you can just hop in the car and drive to a different country. Uh, well, you could do that too, but there's only one country you could drive to in a couple of hours.
That is true. Okay,
But
but yes,
yeah.
it's I mean, this seems to be the location that you've stayed maybe the longest in your career, so something about it has drawn you in.
That is very true, right? So I've been here now since 2009. So that's the longest I've stayed in one place professionally
Yes.
ever before. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that Southern California and this community is pretty good at doing that to a person. So, yeah, well, I have three rapid fire questions that we like to end with. And the first one is, do you have a favorite coffee shop in the area? Or,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's only one answer, one
okay.
correct answer, which is 507. Uh, they have
Yes.
two locations, right? The one is the main one, and the first one is on Los Arboles.
Mm-hmm.
And now they have a new location, a smaller one at TO Boulevard,
Yep.
founded by a Cal Lutheran alum.
I got it. Yeah, I know. They're interesting. Whenever I ask the listeners who they want to hear from, 507 usually rises to the top because it sounds like they've done an incredible job of this community being like a place, a business that really feels rooted in
Yeah.
the location. And yeah, when you go to that one on Los Arboles, I mean, it's always buzzing. People are in there. It just seems like ideas flourishing. It's a really cool space.
Absolutely. Reminds me very much of a Viennese coffee shop combined with a California incubator, right? So,
Okay. That's an excellent description of it. That's fantastic. Okay, so what do you like to do in the Conejo Valley when you're not at the university?
hmm, good question. I like books. I mean, if you could see, you see the sticky notes behind me, but if you could see the rest of my office or even my home, right? I love books. So I like to hang out at Barnes and Noble, right? Just peruse the aisles and look for new things, new books to read. I've always too many books that I haven't read yet, and I'm also one of those people who reads 5 books at a time in parallel. But yeah, I love bookstores. It's sad that we don't have any smaller ones, right? But
Yeah.
maybe that's Sean's next entrepreneurial
Yes,
endeavor.
I think that would be lovely just to add, yes, a more local bookstore or some component of that to a business would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanted to talk about the sticky. So for those who are not watching, um, your backdrop is not a Zoom backdrop. This is your real wall in your office. Can you explain what we would see if you're looking at it?
Yeah, so behind me is my wall of shame or fame, depending how you look at it. It's a wall full of there's hundreds of sticky notes behind me. Um, you know, this is the digital age. I promised myself a long time ago, no more paper.
Hmm.
But the reality is, I still use sticky notes, and other people use sticky notes. And so, whenever I'm done with something, the sticky note goes back up on the wall in the background. So, in a way, you could say it's a wall of accomplishments, things done.
Oh, I know. And it's colorful mosaic of like moments in time, right? So that's
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
well, speaking of your interests though, going back, because you mentioned you had this desire to maybe become a painter when you were in high school. How do you still pursue that as a hobby, or how does that sort of look in your life now?
Yeah, I don't think of it as a hobby, and unfortunately, I don't have enough time to do a lot of it. But painting, drawing is something like meditation for me, right? It completely takes me into the zone. That's pretty much the only time when I'm able to block out everything, right? When I don't know, you watch TV, you're on your phone, and when you know, unfortunately, also sometimes when you're with your family, right, or when you're sitting on the sidelines of your kids' soccer game, you look at your phone. That's not when I'm painting or drawing. Then I'm completely focused and completely relaxed. So yeah, I do a little bit of painting still, not an awful lot.
Okay. But still as like a release. And I agree. It is one of the only, well, I guess there's more things, but it's an interesting medium where you really have to be using both hands likely, or, you're not double screening, you can be
Yeah, yeah.
really focused on something else. Okay. Well, my last question for you is, what is one piece of advice you would offer to first time entrepreneurs?
Um, Stay open to opportunities, right? Talk to as many people as you can. I think we're coming full circle here, right? To what I experienced in my own career. Uh, I'm sure you're familiar with the how I built this podcast by Guy Raz, right? So
Yes.
he often, I think, maybe even always, asked one question: is how much, what is the role that luck played in your journey? And almost always the answer is, oh, it was huge, right?
Mhm.
And luck is not just happenstance. Luck happens when you go out there and you talk to people and you explore opportunities and when you're open to opportunities, even to a complete pivot, right? If you are too focused on your product, your service, your MVP that you're designing, when you're too much in love with what you're doing at the moment and you don't expose yourself to other opinions, then you might miss out on the biggest opportunities that are out there. So just share your view and your vision with the world.
That is great advice. And I do, when I hear your story, think about the luck that's involved and your openness to it, which, I think, and also your relationships, the fact that a relationship from your first university is what brought you to the Conejo Valley. Maybe some people would think that was like by design, but a lot of it was, was you putting yourself out there, it sounds like, and attracting that. And that is sort of goes, it seems like, hand in hand with your advice that you're giving. So.
We have a saying in Austria that roughly translates into you always meet twice, right? So if you meet somebody, be nice to people, be generous in your relationships, offer your help, because you never know when this is going to come back to you. I believe in karma, in lifetime karma, not afterlife karma, right?
I think that's a very good lesson to learn. Before we go, where can people find out more about Hub 101?
Go to the web hub101.org or hub101.la. You have information on what the space offers, the event programming, and a lot of other things.
Okay. And for the Dorfman Incubator Grant, can people apply now, or when does that open up?
We open the applications every year in the spring. Okay. So just check back on our website, March-ish, April, I want to say. That's when we open up the next round of applications.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. Thank you for everything that you're doing to really encourage, nurture the entrepreneurship nature in the area. And I'm sorry, I had one last question. I keep on thinking of these. What is a trend you're seeing in terms of entrepreneurship in the Conejo Valley? Because I think that that's something, as people are graduating maybe school or thinking about starting their own business, obviously that should be an idea they're passionate about. But is there something that you're seeing is really on the cusp or, is booming?
Yeah. Well, the one thing, of course, that has seen rapid growth in recent years is biotech. For the longest time, right, we had Amgen, and then we had Baxter becoming Baxalta, becoming Shire, becoming Takeda. And those two companies basically sucked up all the talent. But in the last 5 years or so, there's really been an uptick in entrepreneurial activity. We have so many early stage companies that are promising in the biotech sector. So that's definitely an area to watch.
Okay, to keep your eye out. Well, thank you for that. Thank you so much for all of your time. This is fantastic. And I cannot wait for everybody to go check out Hub 101 and learn more about all the things that you're doing over there.
Thank you, Christina. I mean, you're doing your part, certainly, with the podcast. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Make sure to subscribe to Conejo Valley Visionaries wherever you listen to podcasts so that you never miss an episode. And follow us at Conejo Valley Visionaries on Instagram. If you want to share your visionary story on the podcast, send us a DM. We are always open to guest nominations. This episode was produced by Christina Denstead and Justin K. Sloan. Conejo Valley Visionaries is edited by Justin K. Sloan and J. Sloan Productions.